Will you pray with me? Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts in this time together be holy and acceptable to you, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So we continue to explore the milestone points along the journey of becoming a disciple. Work we've been doing slowly with time to reflect on our personal journey week by week. And to recap the ground that we've covered, a disciple experiences the forgiveness and acceptance of God, follows the life and teachings of Jesus Christ, demonstrates the fruit of the Spirit, and shares in life and witness of a community of disciples. This week, we begin exploring what it means that a disciple of Jesus Christ serves in some form of ministry every day. Now, I confess that as a pastor, sometimes I struggle to distinguish the tasks of the daily to-do list from the servanthood to which I'm called, because that's part of what it means to serve in some sort of ministry every day, to give ourselves over each and every day as servants to the Lordship of Jesus, and to use the gifts that we have received in order to love God and to love one another. Now, as I typed that earlier this week, that seemed pretty cut and dried. It seemed like a pretty cut and dried definition of what it means to serve. But it would not be true for me to tell you that everything I do qualifies as servanthood. And I'm guessing that's true for most of us, right? But we're called to give something of ourselves to the work of loving God and neighbor every single day. Not accidentally, but with intention. I wonder, how does that make you feel? Where does that land in your gut? Does it make you feel challenged, tasked, affirmed, overwhelmed, hopeful? Take a moment. Think about it. A disciple of Jesus serves in some form of ministry every day. Our scriptures today shape our calling to this work, even today. The text from Deuteronomy, which is a portion of Shema, which is a centerpiece prayer of the morning and evening Jewish prayer ritual. The words are still recited daily to call the people to enact their love of God as a center point in their lives, a tradition that they are called to hand down through the generations and to bear testimony to their liberation and bondage from slavery under Pharaoh. This summons was to wake up every morning with your God goggles on and to make sure that each step you take is through the lens of loving God. And this prayer would have deeply shaped, we think, Jesus, right? It would have been part of the foundation from which teachings like his on the Beatitudes or his response to those who clamored for his healing touch sprang forth. This was a bedrock. And when we let it, the same teaching shapes us today. We love the Lord our God with all of our might and all of our mind and all of our heart. And we bind these things and we tell them to our children and to our children's children, and we mount them on our doorposts. Next up, of course, is a quotable moment with Micah, one of those that shows up on our walls and posters and frames and things like that. Micah was a prophet who spoke truth to power. Specifically, he spoke to both religious and political power, and especially into stronghold cities of power, both Samaria and Jerusalem. He looked at the destruction that the kingdoms faced, and he declared it punishment for the lack of covenant faithfulness to God. Corrupt officials, economic exploitation, violent oppression, and religious manipulation. Micah called it all out as unholy. He looked at the destruction as punishment for people having lost their way with God. And he was gravely concerned for the underclass, the shepherds and the laborers on whose backs the rich got richer. He looked around and reframed the sacrifice that people were to make, not burnt offerings or firstborn sons. The call that Micah issued is to seek justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. It is a call back to the promises that the people led by Moses made with God, to keep the laws and traditions that demonstrate the people's commitment to being an example, and frankly, a light and shelter to the peoples around them. And so this call is to more than just tending rules. It is a call to wider justice, to concern for the orphan and the widow and the immigrant, for the underclass, for dismantling oppression and misused power. And finally, the instruction that is offered by the letter to the church at Ephesus is a call to unity as a body, as well as a reminder that all parts of the body function differently and uniquely, and that is on purpose. Some are prophets, apostles, evangelists, preachers, teachers, but all of those varying gifts function toward a oneness that testifies to God's love in the world. And so this call is about recognizing and fine-tuning our gifts and bringing them to a shared table where they become part of something that is so much bigger than ourselves. Why does a disciple serve in ministry each and every day? Because we're called to this. Not because it is the icing on the cake or the end product or actually our fruitfulness per se, but because it is part of the journey that we're on. So we have a glimpse at 3 nudges about how we're called to make our love of God the very lens through which we use our time and talent, called to think about service as sacrifice that is time and resources poured into justice and mercy, called to see ourselves individually as vital parts, but also to be part of a bigger whole system that functions in the world. Why is our service so vital to this journey? Because the bottom line is that we are changed by the work that we do, especially when we focus on God in the process. We cannot help but to know those who have need differently when we're serving. We cannot help but understand how we are all beloved of God. We cannot help but see ourselves differently along the way. And we cannot help but understand God differently in the process. We are transformed by serving in ministry each day, and the world around us is transformed as well. Next week, we'll talk a bit more about our unique giftedness and what it is that we bring into this call. But today, let's let this simple thing sink in. You are called. Each of us is called. And in that call, each of us is uniquely working toward loving God and loving the people around us. And through that call, we will be changed, and so will the world we touch. May it be so. Amen.